Okay, welcome folks to the session number 7 of the Unfinished Revolution. And I have to keep saying that's mankind's unfinished revolution. That's not Doug Engelbart's unfinished revolution. And today in this session we've labeled it Scalable Improvement Infrastructures. And we'll try to talk a number of ways about scalability and scale itself means. And we have 4 interesting speakers that are going to populate some of those domains about the scaling issue, and we'll have a good discussion at the end about that. So you might remember in our very first session, and then number 3 also, we had presentations about the Millennium Project, a thing that United Nations University has sort of sponsored. And there they pointed out, after 3 or 4 years of work with collected people around the world, they evolved something like 15 grand challenges that mankind is facing at the turn of the new millennium. And any one of those you could plainly see is going to take, a huge collection of people to be involved in finding the solution. So that was done really on purpose to put that out there. We know that none of us is equipped right now to take care of that thing, but if there's going to be a meaningful strategy for how you get mankind ready, we have to have a strategy that can climb towards handling that kind of scale. So I want to review first here today some of the sort of aspects about scaling that we talk about, and we'll go through a number of talks that have some relevance to it, and I'll try to tie in the relevance. Or maybe I should leave it all just to the speaker to say why his topic is relevant. But so this unfinished revolution, the only assumption I can make is that it can't succeed unless there's a strategic approach that's appropriate for handling the scale. And we want to talk about these different issues of scale. So multidimensional challenges, that means they don't involve just a large this, but a large this along with large this and a large this, all coordinated in their complexity and size. So that's really very, very large scale issues then when you combine lots of large scale things sort of in an interactive process of existing. So anyway, we talk about some of the different dimensions that you can address the scalability with. So one is the dimension of detail. See, it's like from detailed attention to more effective symbolic representation of our concepts. Now they're deep things that I found some really interesting communities out there that have been dealing for, since the turn of the century and beyond about the sort of ways in which your conceptual machinery better folds itself around the symbols and the arguments, etc., that are there. And we have options now with the technology to really interface much more effectively with the very bare bones kind of capabilities that we humans have. And something like that. So another dimension is organizational size. That's the one people usually look at. And so the detail one goes from very detailed about how the human needs working. That's both cognitive, sensory, perceptual, and emotional. All of the bigger part of your brain works as things you're unconscious with, and that all has to be factored into the thing. So and then the dimension of organizational size, all the way from from individuals that have important roles, all the way up through the biggest collection of parties that have to deal carefully with complex problems in international setting or something. So the scale of how many people are involved has to sort of pass and operate at almost every scale level in between, as well as every level of the detail about deep down in that kind of human processes on up into the group processes, etc. And there's another one. That's sort of the dimension of time, the scalability there. That some things you have a lot of time and are slow and complex, etc., to deal with, and some things are complex and there isn't much time. So the time scale is a very important factor in there too. So it's all those kind of scales somehow that if humans are going to be able to really develop their collective capability a lot more effectively to deal with complex, urgent problems, it has to handle the kind of scaling we're talking about here. So then you come around to strategy about that. It says you have to start someplace. So in the framework we've evolved, it's that you need to start in something you can get a hold of. And you have to have an evolutionary strategy about it that can gradually handle more and more of the scope that you're dealing with. And so this is why we perplex some people by talking about the changes in the software, the tool system. And some of those changes sort of are important to inaugurate early because they'll make a big difference in how you can do the coevolution of the other things that have to be evolved. But at the same time, we need to start, as I'll point out a little later, which why not do it now when I'm right here? We found a small group of people interested in technology that want to start doing something. So that's great. Build that up. But they have to be balanced by groups of people starting to grow that are dealing with these other factors that you could call in the human system, in the methods and the conventions and the roles, etc., that go on inside the organizations. And those have to get represented by people interested in evolving better ways in those factors. And so they're all going to be co-evolving. Right. So that getting an environment for coevolution is a very key thing, and that might be done earliest with not very many communities learning how to do it, but picking those communities is a very important strategic sort of thing. So we talk about all that. So in the question of scaling too, that I had a marvelous experience in the 50s, late 50s, of getting a project that I said, I want to do a study of the dimensional scaling of electronic components. And I didn't know much about them, but I knew that they were going to get smaller and smaller, and so what would happen? And I uncovered things in the world of physics and biology that were just really, really interesting. And one of the things that it just did me in so much in good stead is the surprises that are there when you witness changes in scale, in things you're familiar with, and you change the scale a little while, and it says, So here's a little test. It's like saying, suppose this room and everything in it and everybody in it suddenly scaled up in every dimension by a factor of 10. So then it says, so these questions, would you notice? How many people think you'd notice? Oh, so then the next question is, what would you notice? So he says, well, he's 10 times farther away, but he's 10 times taller, so that's sub 10 the same angle visually. And now what would you notice?
Nobody couldn't move. We'd all be dead. It feels pretty hot here.
Couldn't breathe.
Right. So then the questions are, how surprised would you be at all the things that happen? So here's what would happen. You're 10 times wider, thicker, taller. That means you're 1,000 times the volume. So you'd weigh 1,000 times as much. Oh, that's all right. But how much stronger are you? Well, that's depending on the cross-sectional area of bones and muscles. So you're only 100 times stronger for weighing 1,000 times as much. And that's a little disadvantage. So you says, that's like if suddenly you weighed 10 times more than you do now. You'd have a little bit of trouble. And you said, well, what'll I do? Well, don't worry. Your chair would break too because it's not built for that. And then you said, well, somebody'd have to come and help me, but who? See? Then you says, you'd have a little trouble breathing too. Like how much more metabolism do you have? 1,000 times. 1,000 times the oxygen need. How much more surface area your lungs have? 100 times. 10 to 1 deficiency there. So anyway, all the way around, would your heart be able to handle the blood flow, etc.? So anyway, the thing is, you're just not designed. You're designed for a given scale. And for many, many people that we go through that exercise and they're sort of jolted. And there are other ones that sort of, what's the tallest tree in the world and why aren't there taller ones? Well, that's scaling too. You look at little creatures and you say, it's really interesting. A squirrel can go run up a tree trunk and out on a limb and then jump 20 feet and such. And you say, wait a minute. If I ran up something that fast, I'd be out of breath. But it doesn't even bother himself. So what none of these studies is, the smaller you are, the less that gravity affects you. And that's why a mosquito can operate on such totally spindly legs. And also, it just needs very little effort against the air to fly. So that's what it is. And then you says, oh, what about dust motes? You see them floating around in the air. Well, gravity doesn't mean much to them compared to getting buffeted by air molecules bouncing around like that. So it's just a really interesting thing. So the designs at different scales will be very, very different. So if we're used to organizations of a given size with a given intensity of activity, etc., and all sorts of things, the scale starts to change. So there are many, many factors inside these relationships that go on and the dynamics of it that just have to be reconsidered, because at the scales that are coming about, they just won't be the same. And so the sooner we can get smart about perceiving what is likely to happen in those scaling factors, the sooner we have a chance of adapting. Because if we do all our adapting to the technology and these really interesting ways about it, that assuming things are going to be just like they are, except, oh boy, e-commerce and stuff. So, they're beginning to find a few little things like that popping up that the governors are saying, hey, wait a minute, how do we tax these e-businesses that are scattered around the world? So there are changes there. So those are just the first little ripples. So anyway, so you passed pretty well on this test like that. But anyway, for lesser changes of scale, unsurprising quantitative effects are experienced in related characteristics. So we all sort of aware of that. For larger scales, qualitative effects begin to emerge. And for further scales, you just should expect to be surprised, just the way. So when I first started laying out what I'm going to show you soon, I'll tell you what I wrote to tell you first before I tell you what I thought of in my head when I... See, the mysteries of what goes on in the mind are very interesting, especially mine. It just it very easily starts sprouting. So anyway, we should expect multidimensional surprises because we're changing in component dimensions. And with compounded increases in complexity and more than a few cases of serious problems which have to be handled collectively, often by new coalitions, etc. So we've got challenges. So we'll come back to one of my favorite diagrams of all. And this says, all right, this represents a human organization and its infrastructure capabilities and what those capabilities depend upon in the way of technology and artifacts, in the way of individuals' perception, mental motor capabilities, and all these things about paradigms, organization, structure, procedure, customs, etc., and the skills. So all of these things augment the people. And so it's been that way since we first started operating as families and tribes. And it's grown more and more complicated. And so the eruption of the right-hand side is what we assume is just going to cause a lot of changes, because there's no way, we've gone that before, that it's just going to automate the things that you used to do inside this capability infrastructure. Because when lower order capabilities get suddenly really enhanced considerably, that means you could redesign the way you could do a higher order one, but it could be redesigned anyway because it can utilize the technology directly. And so all those things could shuffle around a lot with changes over here. And so it's the co-evolution of a lot of this inside that capability infrastructure, depending upon changes in the technology and that, and changes in the way that people think and work and see, etc. So that sort of change has been going on slowly, that sort of unrecognized, but it's going to go very much faster. And so then one of the things today is to look at, say, okay, if this organization represents a professional society, oh, okay, it's got a lot of interesting things to it. If it represents the state of California, oh, that's got a lot more things to concern about. Well, what about a great big corporation, multinational? Well, that's a different kind of a structure of capabilities, etc. But in the end, down at a certain level, they depend upon almost all the same kinds. And the interoperation of all of these organizations out in the world, which is totally critical for the total society to work, depends upon a lot of things that are down at the lower levels in there being interoperable. etc. So then we just say, all right, today we're going to have some examples of people talking about, all right, some of the technological things, some of the policy issues that come up as things are changing, which represent, should it be a surprise that it represents new challenges? No. Then you kind of look at, well, what are the processes and the capabilities within society that establishes new policies? Oh, that's interesting. Well, anyway, so it's then our Japanese friend is going to tell us about, a whole country, and so we're interested in the scaling of this thing really, so that in the end you can talk not only about countries but a global sense for this. So we also looked at this dynamic knowledge repository sort of idea that every organizational unit in a sense is going to have this computer-supported dynamic knowledge repository of which we'd identified, or at least pointed out, that these are the three major components, etc. And that the knowledge product is something that dynamically keeps up to date, just like, just as though it were the encyclopedia that's at any given time will describe for you what you need to know about the current state of the applicable knowledge that your organization has, and it's posed like that. So, but then you realize as it scales up that not only does this big organization have a bigger one, more complex, but it's composed of a lot of units there. Each of those independently has to have its own operating dynamic knowledge repository. And oh, guess what? These things are evolving concurrently and integrated, interactive and coordinated. So that's a real challenge. So there are things like that that put down requirements on the kind of technologies and processes and methods, etc., that are being employed, that lead us to say, hey, the only way that's going to happen is have an open system for evolving the standards by which your knowledge containers embody the knowledge, and by which people can interact and manipulate those things across any kind of organization. That there is no way that a monopolistic way in which, or the marketplace, would be very unlikely to be able to handle that thing. So these are all issues that they come from my assessment and analysis through the years, but I really, really look forward to having some dialogue consistent with people that can spend a fair amount of time working at thinking through this kind of thing from their background experience, from their kind of organizations. So then we also saw that improving infrastructure, you could get the ABC sort of way of looking at it, and identify also that the tool system and the human system exploding, that we have a frontier something like this, where this whale down here is really the sort of clustering of today's societies where they fit in some kind of level of tool system utilization and human system sophistication. And because the tool system has just exploded in this horizontal direction so much, it opens up this large frontier. And so it'd be very, very interesting also to get people really doing scenarios and dialogue, etc., about the extent of that frontier and how much greater and bigger it is and more challenging than what any society has ever had to face before, and what that challenge is. So these are important things. And the idea that within any capability infrastructure, that's where you would plant the capability to improve itself, and that if the organizations are going to face what they are, they've got to move upstream, up there, and get to be higher and spend more money, etc. So we also need help in people working through this thing to help get the sort of value proposition based upon to any given organization of, hey, you're under pressure right now, but if you don't invest more in looking ahead and in trying to steer your way into the future, you're going to get left behind. So then we talked about improvement communities that are networked together, acting smart. So that gives you the feedback, and we call them NICs. And we talked about the fact that NICs need improving too, so they cluster together into a meta-NIC. And so these are all sort of things that we have been talking about, that in order that part of looking for a strategy that has a scalability to it that's there, much like that. And then within this, community governments is one of those very, very basic things. So I've taken more time and I want to accelerate here. So we will assume that you got the last 2 slides. My empathy with people out there watching on 28.8 kilobaud, where by the time you get the slide filling up the thing like that, the speaker has galloped on to the next one, which is, I'm very sorry about. So anyway, Barbara Simmons has Simons. You sent me a bio, and you'll have to take care of describing it to your...
Oh, well, I don't have to do that. That's good enough.
All right. So, just in case, there you are.
I certainly know what Doug means about scaling. I'm made very aware of this every morning when I log on and I see all the emails that people from the East Coast have sent me in my inbox, and I try to get even with them at night after they've gone to bed. I think that a lot of what Doug has been talking about and is trying to accomplish is really important and really worthwhile. And the point of view I'm going to be well, basically the thrust of my talk is this is good stuff, this is important stuff, and we have to make sure it can happen. And some of the issues I'm going to be discussing are matters of concern to me that could possibly impact the kinds of things that Doug wants to accomplish. So, in particular, I'm sure everybody's becoming quite aware of this as you read the newspapers. The policy and technology decisions are currently being made, and they will determine the options that are available for communities and institutions such as the kind that people have been talking about in this seminar. And some of these are very basic and fundamental, so we have to consider issues like free speech and censorship, free libraries versus pay-per-view, fair use, and if you don't know what fair use is, I'll define that later in the talk, and first sale, which I'll also define, versus contract law. Those obviously are related to intellectual property law, and that's what I'm going to focus on this talk. But in fact, the issues are much broader and more general than intellectual property alone. And this last point I made, which is, will the net become regulated as radio? I have to confess I don't know a lot about the history of the radio, but I've been learning a little bit about it. In the old days, when the radio first came in as a technology, there were a lot of people, a lot of individuals who were broadcasting, and it was in some ways, I think, a bit like the net was, especially when it first grabbed hold before e-commerce became the major concern. And my feeling is that one of the things that's going on right now is that there is a move to regulate the net, to tame it, to make it safer in some ways, but again, it depends on what your definition of safe is, and that we might find ourselves in a situation in the not-too-distant future where the net is as heavily regulated as radio. To put it another way, well, everybody need to hire lawyers if you're going to be doing stuff. For example, and again, I'm going to illustrate this in the talk, will researchers at universities, corporate research labs, and independent researchers need to hire lawyers to see if the kind of research they want to do is legal? Are people going to be concerned about what they can legally copy at libraries, schools, or as individuals? And the point I really want to make, and I think this does tie in with the general thrust of this seminar, is that it's critically important for computing and technology professionals to be heard on technology policy issues. I've been working as a very dedicated amateur in this area for quite some time. When I first started, it was pretty clear to me that a lot of policymakers didn't really understand the technology very well. That understanding has gotten somewhat better, but it's still a major problem because the fact is nobody can understand all of the technology well. Because it's too broad, too fast-moving, none of us can understand it all. And so you do have a situation of people devising policies and writing laws where neither they nor their staff really understand all the implications of what they're doing. So the area I want to focus on is copyright. So in the course of working in this, I've learned a little bit about copyright. I have to say I'm not a lawyer, I'm a computer scientist. And I'm functioning very much as an amateur in this field, so if you start asking me very complicated legal questions, I'll have to defer to a lawyer in the room if there is one. But copyright was defined in the Constitution of the United States, which says that Congress shall have the power, and this quote is from the Constitution, to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive rights to their respective writings and discoveries. Now, limited times was not underlined in the Constitution. The idea behind copyright when it was established was it was viewed as a trade-off. And so the desire was to encourage creativity. And in order to encourage creativity, the goal was to give rewards to the creators to make them want to do this. And so there was a trade-off of a monopoly on the one hand and making the information ultimately available on the other hand, and being creative. So again, it is my personal belief that there is a move to privatize information. We talk about being in the information age. There are a number of laws that are being passed or being considered which has the effect of reducing the rights of the users in copyright, or in moving away from copyright altogether to contract law. Contract law does not contain the kinds of rights that copyright contains. Copyright was, as I say, the view was it was a trade-off. So you give a monopoly, but the user also gets some rights. The history of copyright is kind of interesting. Again, this is a very brief, very fast level history. This is US, UK, because there was stuff going on in some other countries too. But really, it started in the UK in 1710 with the Statute of Queen Anne. Prior to then, publishers would routinely publish works by authors and not compensate the authors because they didn't have to. There was no right to copyright. So the statute first recognized the right of the creator to own what he or she has created. And I also found it rather interesting to discover that the U.S. for many years was a haven of piracy, especially given how concerned a lot of people are in this country today about piracy, which is going on in China. I'm not condoning that. All I'm saying is that in the 19th century, we were doing the same thing. So translations, for example, were not covered by copyright law in this country till 1870. And there's a famous law case where there was a German translation of Uncle Tom's Cabin, and the judge looked at the English version, looked at the German version, and said, these are clearly not the same. So the German version is not covered by copyright. And that wasn't fixed until 1870 when a law was passed that covers translations. Similarly, works published outside the U.S. were not protected till 1891. So Charles Dickens was furious at this country because his writings were routinely sold for a small fraction. In the example of that I found, A Christmas Carol cost 6 cents in the U.S. and $2.50 in the U.K. Now I don't know what year's dollars those are, but anyway, the point is that there was a significant difference in price because his works were being published basically in pirated versions in the United States. So initially, when copyright was first established, it was for 28 years. The Copyright Act of 1976 retroactively extended it for up to 75 years, and some of you may remember in 1998 the Sony Bono Copyright Term Extension Act was passed, extending it for another 20 years. If you do the arithmetic, you see that there's not much of a gap there. And in fact, if any of you is a Mickey Mouse fan, you might be able to do a little backtracking and see that Mickey Mouse is staying copyrighted very nicely. Thank you very much. It does raise the question as to, is copyright going to be basically unbounded? Now, user rights. First sale. If I buy a book, I can give you my copy. Can't do that with software, right? Because that's contract law. It's kind of interesting that there was an effort made to license books in the early 20th century. Basically to put books under contract law, to kill the first sale right in this country by licensing them and requiring that a minimum, that any resale be for basically the same price that the original version cost, which would kill the used book market. And this was thrown out by the courts. And similar to some of the things that are going on today with software, in my view. Anyway, that's first sale. It exists for copyright. It does not exist under contract law. And if we're going to publish books digitally under shrink-wrap license provisions, we won't have the first right sale necessarily. Fair use is not really a right, it's a defense. If you get accused of copyright violation, you can defend yourself by saying what I did was fair use. And again, it's defined in the 76 legislation, and it's allowable for purposes such as, and again, this is straight from the legislation, criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research. So those are not infringing. But again, it's subjective, and it's a question of how much did you copy and what purposes and so on. So these things frequently get decided in court. There was a report that came out a few months ago from the National Research Council on intellectual property. And I quote this because they are basically saying the same thing as what I'm saying in this talk, which is they're calling for delays in new laws for intellectual property until markets have had ample time to adjust to a new model in doing business and until sufficient research on the issues is conducted. And the report says that was just taken from their press release. They expressed concern about first sale, and they are also concerned the copyright law will be replaced by contract law. So the question is, where are we going? Well, basically what happened was a few years ago, the movie, the record industry, and some publishing industry looked around them and they said, oh my God, we've got the net, we've got electronic publishing, people can make unlimited numbers of copies that are identical to the original, that are as good as the original, and distribute them for free. And this caused a lot of concern. As a result, there was a push for increased legislation that started some years back in the early 90s. And I do believe that one of the reasons that this happened was that the people in Washington who are concerned about these things were mainly lawyers and not technical people, and their main focus was on how can we change the law to protect us, as opposed to, for example, how might technology protect us against the things that technology has created. So there was a push for new legislation. The legislation almost uniformly has restricted rights of users and has had very stiff penalties. So this is an example I want to discuss for most of the remainder of the talk, and that's the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that was passed in 1998. Now, this is just one example of intellectual property legislation that has passed. And there are other laws that are pending or that are going to be considered this year. But this is a particularly interesting one. It was to implement the World Intellectual Property Organization Treaty on intellectual property, and this was a treaty that was written in part in response to the net and to the changing technologies. It was passed in '98 and signed into law. It takes the approach of criminalizing technologies and technological devices, and it was selected over an alternative which many of us thought was far superior, which was a bill proposed by Butcher and Campbell, Democrat and Republican. And I'll discuss both of the bills. So the Digital Millennium Copyright Law outlaws reverse engineering except for compatibility, encryption research with the permission of the copyright holder, privacy protection, and to protect minors against porn. It's kind of interesting because the encryption research carve-out was put in there when a number of companies in Silicon Valley looked at this bill and said, oh my God, this could make some of what we do illegal. So they were able to get encryption research specifically written into the law. But notice it does require permission of the copyright holder. So, for example, if you think you've got, if someone is selling you something with bad encryption and you want to try to reverse engineer it to see if it's easily breakable, it's not, this law could make that illegal. And some of you may know of something that's been in the papers recently about that, where a 15-year-old student, well, a 15-year-old did that. Anyway, since it makes technologies or devices that are primarily designed for circumvention illegal, it can have the impact of criminalizing some routine computer security R&D. For example, computer security people routinely will try to break into systems because we can't prove the system is secure. So you try to break into it, and if you're a professor of computer security, you teach your students how to try to break into it. Well, this is in fact circumvention. And this is the kind of thing that the law forbids. So looking at some of the definitions from the law, which are kind of interesting, they talk about and this is something which, as a theoretician, I find, one of the things theory people worry about is how to get good definitions of things. And you read some of this legislation, and your head can start to spin. Technological measures for protecting copyright is what they talk about. And so what is that? Well, that's basically an effective control, effectively controls access to the work. Well, what does that mean? What does effectively mean? Is strong encryption an effective control? What about weak encryption? What about data compression? What about an obscure human language or compilation? Could it even be the case that decompilation is illegal? It's not obvious because, of course, the people who wrote this legislation weren't thinking about that. They weren't out to make decompilation illegal, I'm quite sure. But, you know, you worry about what does the wording mean. And then primarily designed for circumvention. Again, would VCRs have been illegal had this legislation been in place at the time in terms of their having the ability to copy? Or is breaking encryption illegal? I had an interesting comment with somebody from the government who was involved with this, and I said, well, you know, we use crypto to protect a lot of our stuff. What if somebody were to break RSA or break one of the major encryption algorithms? And he looked at me and he said, well, why would anyone want to do that? And I said, well, you know, you might get tenure. and he sort of chuckled and he said, well, you could enjoy your tenure in prison. Now, I don't think he seriously meant that. He was sort of half joking, but it was like the concept that anybody legitimate would even want to try to break an encryption algorithm had not occurred to him. The penalties, as I've said, are pretty significant. This is for circumvention. The first offense, you can be penalized up to $500,000 or 5 years in prison or both. Subsequent offenses, the maximums are doubled. Now, these are the maximums. It doesn't mean everyone's going to get these, but this is a federal offense. And the potential for being really hit hard is very serious. This legislation was opposed by the librarians. They were very concerned about contract law replacing copyright and fair use and first sale being eliminated. ACM was very concerned about this because we felt the technology had not been taken into account, that it outlaws technologies instead of behaviors. Now, the alternative bill that was also introduced in Congress took a different point of view. It prohibits altering, or prohibited because it didn't become law, altering or deleting copyright management information for the purposes of infringement. Purpose is not included in the bill that passed. So some of the things that we computer scientists or computer technical people routinely think of as being legitimate things to do, and we're not trying to infringe on anybody else's work, might, under this bill, be considered to be illegal, at least with a literal reading of the bill. It would have prohibited enforcement of terms in shrink-wrap and click-on agreements when they reduce privileges recognized by copyright law, and it would have incorporated fair use and first sale rights. It also would have expanded the rights of librarians and archivists, protect authors' works under traditional legal understandings, and it only had civil penalties, not criminal. So just a couple of final comments. ACM has a digital library. We've been investing a great deal of resources and time into building this library, and I like to think of it as an existence proof because we are not depending on this kind of legislation to protect our intellectual property. We're taking a very different approach. In particular, our copyright policy is about as liberal as you can get. You can copy any of our stuff for any purpose at all, so long as you're not doing it for commercial reasons. Because we consider ourselves to be an educational society. We want to make this material available. Of course, we also have to make sure we'll get some income so we can maintain the library. So we're not making it all free. You have to join the digital library. You have to subscribe to the digital library. And we hope that people will take this in the spirit in which it's presented, which is that we want people to make use of the material, but we also want them to support us because I think what we're doing is very important. And by showing that you can do this, you can put your material online, you can make it easily available, and you're not going to go after people for making copies or for distributing it so long as they're not doing it for profit, and you can stay in business. I think that that's one argument against some of these draconian bills that are being passed. And I think I'll skip over this slide. Basically, we've got most of our material from 1985 till now in the library. We're going back, and we're going to eventually have everything that ACM has ever published in the library. We're acquiring other societies' works. We're going to third-party popular content. We've reduced reduced fees for tiers 2 and 3 countries, in other words, the economically disadvantaged countries, because we want them to have access to our work at a price they can afford. and we provided high-speed links, which are costing a lot of money, in part because it makes it possible for people outside the U.S. to be able to download this material in a reasonable way. So, what can you do? If you are a researcher or an editor, or if you publish anything, check the policy of the publisher with whom you're publishing, check their copyright policy, their fair use policy, and their pricing for libraries policy. I haven't gone into that, but some of the for-profit publishers are charging libraries a great deal, and libraries are having a lot of trouble being able to continue their subscriptions to everything that they want to get. Also, by the way, this is true at Stanford too, because this was pointed out to me very strongly by some Stanford librarians. Be informed and work on educating policymakers and the judiciary about the implications of the various proposals, about unintended consequences such as criminalizing computer security R&D, which I am sure nobody wanted to do. Right? I mean, I think we all agree that computer security is very important. So nobody wanted to criminalize it. And, you know, I don't think that we're going to have midnight raids on Gene Spafford at Purdue University, who's a well-known computer security expert. But having laws like this means that you may have university professors having to consult with lawyers to see if what they're doing, if they might conceivably be subject to prosecution for the research they're doing. So I think, hopefully, I'm convincing you that it's important for all of us to get involved with this. Thanks. This to you? When you've got one.
Yeah, Alan gets that. I really enjoyed listening to that, because I think, okay, in the future, that's an example of things cropping up that are complex, and what are the communities of stakeholders in that should be involved, and how can we provide them with better means to do the discussion, to raise out the issues and understand them better, and then go through something about deciding and the nature of those things. And so next, I'd like to just shift right in and bring up for Alan Cox his treatment. And as it says here, he's Executive Director of Executive Events for what's called Government Technology. And you'll tell them all about it.
Yes. Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you. It's nice to be here today. Actually, I'll share a very quick story with you. I have a long-standing relationship with Doug Engelbart through my father. He and my father worked together years ago at SRI, when it was still the Stanford Research Institute before it became SRI International. And so it's growing up in Palo Alto. I was born on the campus. My parents both graduated from Stanford. It's kind of a treat for me to be here today. I was walking by the Tresidder Union. I parked in the parking lot, and that's where I used to come bowl when I was in high school, across the way at Palo Alto High School. So nice to be back here. I would love to live in Palo Alto, but you all need to do something about the pricing. Sacramento's a lot more affordable. So I work for a company called eRepublic, and we're a publishing company. We are an improvement community. I'm going to tell you a little about what our company does. I'm going to talk about the area that we work within, what are the statistics of that area. I'll talk about the trends of the marketplace that we're in and the improvement opportunities that are there. eRepublic, well, we publish. We publish all sorts of things. We publish a national magazine, Government Technology Magazine. This has been something we've published for about 13 years. It's a free publication. It's sponsored by industry advertisement. It's free to anyone who wishes to subscribe. It's all about what are state and local governments around the United States and in other parts of the country doing with technology to solve their business problems. And in government, you're dealing with a community that's very largely a knowledge community. If you take correctional officers out, you take the Department of Transportation people who are out fixing freeways and engineering, you have primarily knowledge workers, social workers, case workers, people in criminal justice who are dealing with law. So it's very much a knowledge group that we're talking about. We also publish a magazine, and this is a fairly new magazine called Converge Magazine. Converge Magazine is all about the convergence of technology into education at all levels, from K through 12 point of view, higher ed, lifelong learning, adult learning. All sorts of money is coming into education to buy technology, and for the most part, educational institutions are unsure of the value of technology in educating. Now, here we have a webcast going on. This is a very innovative use of technology, certainly, but where does a kindergarten teacher use a PC, and how do they use a PC in their classroom? We talk about some of that. We also realized that there was a problem with people who sell to government, because they don't understand who they're selling to, they don't understand what government is about, they don't understand the politics, they don't understand the budgeting, they don't understand the dynamics of the organization. There's a huge difference between the public sector and the private sector, which we'll get into. We also publish our editorial information in the form of conferences and events. This week we're in Austin, Texas for the entire week with about 50 different classes, seminars, tutorials, keynote speakers, 350 exhibitors, and a large trade show that's called the Government Technology Conference Southwest, and it's for the region around Texas. We do one in California, in Sacramento, which has about 22,000 people attend annually. We also do one in Albany, New York, and as you'll see from one of my slides, these are 3 of the largest states in terms of IT budgets and employment. The last thing, and I'll talk about this more, is the Center for Digital Government, which is our main effort right now to act as an improvement community. And also, since we do publish, we're talking about a very linear way of reaching people. We can gather information from all over the country as to what is going on in New York, what's going on in Albany, what's going on in New York City, what might be going on in Iowa or Idaho. But we can only publish that, or in the past could publish that very linearly once a month, or in talking to people in a classroom setting such as this at one of our conferences or executive level events. So the Center for Digital Government is our effort to improve how we actually provide people access to our research and our information. So, government. In case you didn't know this, there are 50 states in the United States. Recently someone posed the thought that the 51st state might be a cyber state. There are 5 territories, numbers of counties, in total about 87,000 different government organizations in this country. It's a pretty sizable group, and if you talk about scaling, which Doug mentioned very early on, you're looking at cities that have a very small number of people. Where I live up in the foothills in a little town called Georgetown. It's about 50 miles from Sacramento, about 45 miles from our office in Folsom. It's a very small community. We don't have a sheriff's department. We don't have a police department. We've got a volunteer fire department. It's your traditional small community in the gold country of California. Well, you compare that to New York City. New York City's annual budget is as large as anyone in the Fortune 100. So in dealing with the use of technology in government, the scaling of what people do in California, you might have 50 people doing an automated process that Rhode Island has 2 people doing part-time manually. There's very different ways that people are approaching how they're handling all the data, all the services that they provide as government organizations. Government employment is huge. You might not realize just how many people are employed in government. Here I show 12 million in local government, 4.6 state, 2.7 million federal, 1.5 in federal military. Well, if you start looking at this, 16 states are in the Fortune 100 in terms of their operating budget. California is in the top 10. All 50 states are in the Fortune 500. 12.5% of the United States workforce is employed by a government organization. 10% of the U.S.'s information technology spending is in the government marketplace. It is the largest vertical if you're a marketeer or a salesperson. It's the largest vertical comparing it to legal or banking or one of the various vertical markets that the computer industry sells to. $55.8 billion in IT spending. It's a huge amount of money being spent by government to automate what they're doing in a variety of ways. And unfortunately, you read a lot about the areas where government is having challenges. California has had many notable ones. I hate to mention the one about, that one is that's not even the biggest DMV failure in the country. You can go to another state just north of us that had an even more expensive failure of their motor vehicle system. But California's Correctional Management Information System was also shelved, very expensive. You're dealing with millions and millions of dollars of effort. California's statewide automated welfare system, another problematic system. And every state in the country is grappling with these situations. California just has a problem of being so huge and so vast with so many people, the number of motor vehicles. It's a staggering issue of how do you apply technology, and you can find all these great lessons learned from other parts of the country, but looking at how Wyoming automated its motor vehicle system compared to how California automates its motor vehicle system, the scale is tremendously different. You can take all of Los Angeles County and say, well, we still have more cars than Wyoming. So there are definitely some challenges that government faces. So what's going on now? And this is where I think it starts to get interesting in terms of technology especially. I have a few quotes for you. This is Joe Thompson, former CIO of the federal government's General Services Administration. Right now, however, you should know that state spending on IT is accelerating at 4 times the rate of federal spending. The reason is simple. Federal funds are being sent down to state and local level, and the state and local governments are being asked to provide those services. Well, this creates quite a challenge. Instead of one group providing services, now you've got 50 in the case of states, or 87,000 in the case of towns. Towns are growing. There will be 5% more towns at the end of this year than there were at the start of the year. More and more towns are springing up everywhere. They're all being asked to provide services that the federal government used to provide. Well, if you look at any part of the private sector, let's take a Home Depot as an example. You don't go to Home Depot to buy a hammer and then go across the street to Nails R Us to buy nails and then to Wood MI to buy wood. You go to one place to buy all this. Well, in government, instead of having the federal government provide a particular service, the federal government says, no, let's cut taxes. Let's have the states and the counties and the cities provide this instead. The state does this the same way to the counties. The state says, we're going to lower taxes. Then they grab tax money back from the counties and say, but you still have to provide those services you've been providing. So there are some interesting paradoxes here. But money is being pushed down to the state and local level. This has been going on for a while. This is why we've focused in on this area. It's where most of the technology spending is happening in government, state and local level. So what's going on? Well, we've got this big digital economy that in Silicon Valley, certainly you're all aware of. E-everything is certainly the buzzword. My brother and sisters are all very involved in this community. I'm sure all of you are to some degree. The culture is changing dramatic. Don Tapscott writes about this in his book, Growing Up Digital, talking about the net generation, kids who grew up with computers and toys more powerful than the general who used to command NORAD had at his disposal. All of this is impacting right into the middle of government, manufacturing, education, banking, and the bottom 3 of those have definitely taken advantage of that. You look at a Dell Computer Corporation or a Cisco who have taken the intranet technology and actually used it and implemented it to streamline their processes and their efficiencies from end to end. Now, governments don't quite work that way. You have not the same focus in government. So to say, I'm going to replace everything, 1, you don't have the budget to do it probably, but 2, you also don't have necessarily the political will to do it. You're not a CEO who can say, oh no, this is what we're doing whether you like it or not, Mr. or Mrs. Employee. So what you have is the deliberate tempo of government running headlong into a world running on internet time. And this is from Steve Khiladi, who's the Chief Information Officer of the state of Washington. Washington is a very progressive state in the use of technology. They actually have a statewide infrastructure that's as sophisticated as any in the private sector. All the cities, all the counties, all the public education institutions, all the libraries, law enforcement, they all have access to this telecommunications infrastructure, and all the state departments are involved in this as well. So in terms of moving information, sharing information, access to information, you have a very sophisticated network there. Washington, for the past 2 years, has won the Digital State Award, which our organization and the Progress and Freedom Foundation runs annually, and we'll talk a little about that. But it's definitely an issue. Most people look at government as a bureaucracy because it is a bureaucracy, and they look on it as slow and plodding. And to a large degree it is, and it's designed to be that way. It's maybe antiquated in the way that it does things, but it serves many purposes to be slow so that government does not rush into something and all of a sudden fail. Maybe they fail slower, but government does have a reason to be somewhat deliberate. So Barbara talked about this, about how well informed are policymakers. Well, the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard did a study and found out in government, CIOs are fairly well familiar with technology, as well as they can be, given that CIOs are very strategic rather than tactical. CEOs, the county administrative officer, the director, the agency secretary, they're fairly familiar, but much less so than their chief technology officer would be. General managers, which are your business level managers that are running maybe the Women, Infant, and Children program, the WIC program in a state in the United States, or are head of the fleet management operation of a county, are definitely farther down the scale. Executive oversight and budget personnel, even less so, as you would expect in most organizations. But here we have legislative bodies. These are your elected officials. 7% of them, this study is at least 2 years old, felt that they were well informed about technology issues. Now I would imagine if you polled how well informed are you about transportation issues, how well are you informed about environmental issues, you might find a similar response from them, but it's definitely a problem because we are entrusting them to make valid decisions on the use of technology, on the funding for technology in our government organizations. So the Digital States Survey, this is the recent one, this is this year's. You can see who's ranking at the top, who's ranking farther down. You might be surprised at California being a very progressive state in terms of the electronic commerce industries, the development of technologies, ranks near the bottom in every category of technology use in government. Near the bottom, if not at the bottom. You have in California, you've had a history of the governor specifically not being very interested in technology. When you have a failure of a DMV, that all I have to do is say failure in California, and almost every one of you said DMV. The governor gets tired of hearing that, and his basic response was, give me a CIO. Okay, Mr. CIO, your job is to protect me, no more failures. Well, how do you have no failures in technology and government? You don't let anybody do anything. It's very simple. So California, therefore, has not fared very well. Washington, you see here, is ranked number 3 in electronic commerce, and this is actually January results of this study. In taxation, Washington is ranked at number 2. So you again have Washington staying near the top of the study. But you also notice states like Georgia, Alaska, ranking number 2. States all different sizes and shapes, basically, are moving very quickly into electronic commerce and providing more than just a form that you can then print out on your computer, fill out by hand, stick in the mailbox, and now your tax return is filled out, which is California's method of tax automation, to actually being able to fill out a tax return and pay your taxes online. They're very different methods of doing this. Kansas scored 100 out of 100 points possible in this area. They are very progressive in how they handle taxation and revenue collection as a state. So, given the scale, given the differences, given the number of entities, what we've tried to do as an organization for the past 14 years with our conferences and events, and for the past 13 years with government technology, for the last year and a half with Converge, and number 3 or 4 years with Reseller, we've tried to find where are people doing things in government that are working. There are plenty of places where you can read about the failures. You can read in the San Jose Mercury, the Sacramento Bee, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times. Plenty of that is out there, but no one was actually taking a look at state and local government and saying, okay, you need to reinvent yourself, that's clear. There's no one talking about it, though, so we thought we'd talk about it, and we find that the private sector is very close to the vest about what it's doing with technology. It's a competitive advantage in some ways. Years after it's been implemented, Cisco now is saying, yeah, this is what we did with our internet, and this is why it's so important. Dell the same way, Microsoft the same way. Government right off the bat, they're willing to talk about it because they don't have any secrets. They're very willing as a CIO, as a department manager, to talk about what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they bought, what they paid for it. It's all public record anyway. But we find that people are willing to share their successes. And so what we're trying to do is bring them all into one place so that in a remote portion of Washington, they can find out the same things that you could find out by going to some sort of meeting here in Silicon Valley. We can grab all this information. And as I said, the problem was it's very linear. Mailing this out once a month is not necessarily timely. It's not all the content. Excuse me. I meet with state-level CIOs, department-level CIOs, all over the country. We work with governors. We work with legislators. We collect a tremendous amount of information, and so we see what the improvement opportunities are. Now it's just a matter of how do we improve our ability to actually get that information to people in a usable way and from different points of view, because there's all this information, but how many ways can you look at it? If you're in the private sector, if you're in the public sector, if you're a citizen, how do you look at that same information, and how do we package it so that it's easy to access from your vantage point? So John Kelly, the Chief Information Officer for the state of Arizona, says, by establishing a technical architecture, the CIO must be aware not only of the current infrastructure, including hardware, software, telecom, and personnel, but also the legal, financial, and cultural restrictions that make an organization operate the way it does. And he's talking about the bottom line of the private sector versus political agenda. He doesn't have the luxury of saying, you know what, this is what we're going to do. If you can't buy our product on the internet, too bad. That's the only way we're going to sell it. Well, you have a problem in government in that you have to be available to everybody. The City and County of San Francisco has just put a resolution on its books, which means they're resolved to do it. It's not a law yet, that their website will be available in over 100 different languages. Now, if you're in the private sector, you can say, no, our sweet spot is Spanish-speaking people. That's what we're going to focus on. Everybody else, well, you know, if you get to be a big enough market, we'll tackle you. But government doesn't have that luxury. Government doesn't have the luxury of saying only online. We also have to tackle inline. So there's a different decision-making process that government has to go through. So Paul Sappho, some of you may be familiar with him. He's the director of the Institute for the Future. In an interview that we did with him, he said, imagine using the web to coordinate among agencies that have similar activities but haven't done the best job of coordinating in the past. Look at a drug bust in your random city where everybody coordinates and it works fine. When it goes badly, you've got city cops stumbling over undercover DEA cops and FBI cops and everybody else in between, and it is a mess. Well, this this idea of collaboration versus segmentation is a major issue within government. Government is very stovepipe-ish in its organization. You have health services, you have motor vehicles, you have corrections, you have a variety of different groups that share similar information. Someone who is part of the Women and Infant and Children program by the Department of Social Services in California very likely may be a, let's see, how about a cosmetologist? And so therefore has licensing issues. They certainly pay taxes at the Franchise Tax Board, and they very likely have motor vehicles that they have registered, and they have a driver's license or an identity card. So with the current way that technology works, they're in at least a dozen different databases with varying amounts of accuracy of that information. How do you coordinate all of this? How can someone, let's say someone gets arrested, and using Paul Sappho's example, someone who gets arrested, how can they move through the criminal justice system with their case following them electronically? Today, it doesn't work that way. The files are moved in a very manual fashion. Someone can get moved from one facility to another within the California Department of Corrections with no idea of what their record is to know, oh, they actually shouldn't have been put with that type of population because that's dynamite. And we've just created a prison riot by doing that. And so there's a tremendous amount of need to collaborate. Another issue would be, let's see, here's a good example. We had a little bit of a fire problem in the Berkeley Hills a number of years ago. And the government organizations had no true awareness of the equipment that they needed to bring in to actually combat that fire. In terms of hoses connecting to fire hydrants, there were different standards being used. There was no way to collaborate, and that's just that constant segmentation of government. It's a problem of jurisdiction. Are you willing to give up your territory for the collective good of the citizens that you serve? Does pollution stop at the border of Palo Alto before it moves into Menlo Park? It must, because that's the way the politicians treat it. We have one version here and you have one version there, and it must stop here, or at least those contaminants that we regulate don't go across to your border and vice versa. That kind of thinking needs to change, and it's definitely an issue for government as they progress forward. Is how do you collaborate? We find nice examples of this. There are government organizations that take their abilities and share them with others. The San Diego Data Processing Corporation is a nonprofit entity set up by the city of San Diego to handle all of their data processing. Well, they actually provide those services to cities and counties all over the United States now. The city of West Covina, same idea. They provide data processing services to cities and counties all over the United States because they have decided to be experts in this area, and their viewpoint is all we're talking about here is a police management system for your records. Why don't we centralize that? We've got a state-of-the-art system. You can use ours, have all the access you want. We'll take the people, we'll charge you a fee. Why do you want to reduplicate what we've already done? And that kind of thinking, while it makes sense with technology, is lost on the political side of government. Inline versus online. Many Americans, including those who own and operate their own business, are on the wrong side of the digital divide because of governmental regulations. And this is from a paper called The Other Digital Divide by Phil Burgess and Florine Raitano at the Center for the New West. They deal with a lot of rural issues, telecommunications being their number one issue, the digital divide being a very discussed issue. I know one of the senior senators in California, Senator Polanco, that's his biggest issue right now, that he's interested in the digital divide. He represents the Latino caucus for all of the legislators and senators in California. It's the group of Spanish-speaking legislators in California. It's a very powerful group. The digital divide definitely affects people who don't speak English. It affects people who don't have the educational skills or ability to use technology. It affects people who can't afford technology. It affects the private sector, where you have a business that can't afford high-speed lines and a business that can. Well, business-to-business e-commerce is going to be a $1.3 trillion business by the year 2003. That's a lot of money, from my point of view anyway. So how does government work in this area of who has technology, who doesn't have technology? We have to have people stand in line, but people want to be online. In Palo Alto, everybody wants to be online. They're having the city install fiber everywhere. Well, you don't have that in Georgetown, I can promise you that. We're lucky to have power. Our power was out 2/3 of the day Saturday, and from 7:30 in the morning till 3:30 the following morning on Monday. So we have a different challenge there, and the government has a different challenge in terms of providing just basic services, even though that's not a government service. The utility district handles that, but it's definitely a challenge. And there are many improvement opportunities there. Before I cover this, in fact, I'm going to go back so you don't read it. The issue that we're trying to grapple with now, as I said, is how to present this information to people. So we've created the Center for Digital Technology, and the purpose of that is to collect all this information. I go out and meet with executives in government regularly. Our president and CEO, Dennis McKenna, does that. The publisher of the magazine, Don Pearson, does that. The editors, the writers do that. My counterparts that work on our large conferences do that. And we have a lot of contact with very different people, and we hear a lot of very innovative ideas. We hear a lot of great successes. We hear about things that people would like to have discussed in terms of finding solutions. We haven't had a way to gather that. The internet and intranet seems to be the solution for us. It's allowing us to create a knowledge engine and put together a community of people who are interested in talking about subjects electronically and making that available to other people. So in terms of our efforts, there aren't many people doing what we do. You have a couple research companies that dabble in this area, Gartner, Forrester. You have the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard, that definitely spends some time here. But really no one is spending a lot of time helping government, and government needs a lot of help. They need bootstrapping. They need augmentation of their knowledge. They need to hear what other people are doing. And they're not getting it. So this is our effort at being an improvement community, and we've collectively said we need to improve. We need to find better ways to get this information out. So that's hence the Center for Digital Government. So final thought. This is our founder, Dennis McKenna. When launching government technology back in 1987, several colleagues couldn't understand why I would want to start a publication about what they thought were two of the dullest subjects around, technology and government. Contrary to their expectations, this field has been very dynamic and grows more so each year. So with that, thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure being here today. If any of you would like a copy of this presentation, you can grab a business card from me and I can send it to you. And feel free to visit our website at www.govtech.net, and you can follow what we do, get involved with what we do. We're happy to have people subscribe and interact with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do is not let them sit down and hide. So we'd really like to take a sort of a challenge now to get them to ask questions for each other. We'll ask them some, then we'll open it up for here. It's clear that a lot of improvement that's going to happen, and what aspects of the improvement challenge are things that improvement communities and NICs someday, how would they have to grow in effectiveness before they could actually support the kind of things you see? So challenge each other, and then Marcelo and I will ask you questions. You'll have to hold the button down.
I have a question that occurred to me during your talk. Can you hear me? Is this working? You talked about the combining databases. I think this was for law enforcement. Is that right? And one thought which came to my mind, which always comes to my mind when we're talking about large databases, is privacy. And I'm wondering to what extent the people who are working on these issues are concerned about privacy and how they might be trying to build that into the whole structure.
That's a good question. Clearly, from the government's point of view, there are a couple issues that they're dealing with in providing information electronically. One, there are mandated programs that the legislature has mandated. The Polyclass Initiative is one where sexual predator information is now available on the internet from a law enforcement agency. You also have the issue of a person's record, someone who has been accused of a crime and is moving through the correctional system in a particular way. Usually there are two different systems. There are very private intranets that the government runs up and down the state for law enforcement. There are also more public things on the other side of the firewall, so to speak, for this more public information. But it is an issue that policymakers are talking about. Security and privacy is an issue at every one of the conferences and executive level events that I conduct. From a variety of different ways. Usually we get involved with moderated panel discussions in this area. So yes, policymakers do talk about this. It's something that we actually spend a considerable amount of time researching and writing about.
All right. How about Marcelo? Do you have?
If there are no other questions, I have one question for both, for Barbara and Alan. Given your positions, which communities would you suggest to start for the greatest bootstrapping gain? And I know that this is hard to define, but just sort of which would you be your pet communities if you had a choice?
Well, I'll take a quick answer at this. In terms of where my personal interest lies, I see a ruin in the educational community in general in how we educate children. And in terms of being able to find collective successes, there are successes all over the world in education that get lost down at the teacher level. And so if I had to pick one place that could use the most help, and what I have the most interest in, having 3 small children, and we chose to homeschool our children because we weren't convinced that the public schools did an adequate job, at least at an early age. Kindergarten is a fairly rudimentary thing to do as a homeschool parent. I'm not sure how I'll do at teaching calculus or algebra or trigonometry, given my success with those in high school. But that area definitely, for me, and the reason we started the Converge magazine was an agreement within our organization that the educational community, there's a tremendous need, and I think they agree, to look at what they're doing and how they're doing it and improve on the process of education.
Well, my main interest, as you've probably gathered from my talk, is the technical community. And those are the people I'm trying to reach. And I'd like to see get more involved with these things, with lots of different issues. Obviously, policy is one which I think is terribly important because it can basically shape everything else. It can frame the whole discussion if we have bad policy. But in addition, for example, ACM has gotten involved with K through 12. I'd like to see more involvement along those lines. One, for example, an idea that I've had but which we haven't been able to implement is now that our field is finally getting a bit older, we actually have a few folks who are retiring. Maybe we could try to tap into some of that knowledge to help with the public schools with setting up some of their technological infrastructure, possibly even to help with some of the teaching, because of course it's very hard for the schools to get someone who's knowledgeable about technology and computing to teach, because they can go out and earn, order of magnitude more money, well, maybe not quite that much, but close to it, in the private sector, and usually have better working conditions. So I think this is terrible, and I'd like to see fundamental changes to how we do education in this country, but since I'm not in a position to do that, at least I can maybe try to harness some of the energy and enthusiasm of the technical community.
This is a question for both of you. Are your respective organizations concerned about how you quantify the improvements that you're affecting on your particular areas? And if so, what sort of things do you do to try and quantify that?
Well, if you're working on policy issues, it's very hard to quantify. It's not like we're a lobbying organization. It's not like we have big bucks to go out and pay people to vote how we think they should vote. We're much more focusing on trying to educate and inform policymakers and our members and the public. And if you're doing something like that, it's kind of ephemeral in a way. I mean, it's hard to measure. And even if what I consider bad legislation gets passed, and it has, that doesn't mean that we didn't possibly have some impact, or maybe even just going around and talking about it to people like I'm doing now has some impact. So I find it very hard to measure. If you have any ideas, I'd be interested.
Yeah, for a publishing company, it's sometimes hard to measure the success of what you write. The last 2 years, we've received an award from Folio. It's called the Folio Award for Excellence in Editorial for our sector of publishing, but that's not quite what you're talking about. It's much harder for us to measure the changes that are occurring in the use of technology in government, or the level of understanding that an elected official will have. I think the only way that we can do that, and we don't track this per se except in our own, we'll take a win on this particular issue, for example, when our readers will email us and send us letters to the editor thanking us for a particular article, or will tell us, or enjoyed what you wrote, but I disagreed with it, and it's more of the feedback that we get from an editorial point of view that tells us whether we're helping people or whether we're not serving anyone's interest whatsoever. So that's really the only way we quantify what we do. Over time at our events and at our conferences, we see growing numbers of people attend. We see the shifting of the focus of the event from an educational point of view. So we know we're interesting people and people are coming back for more information. But again, it's fairly hard to measure, are we having a profound impact on government?
Yeah, I guess it's primarily for Alan and possibly also for Barbara. Taking, for example, the Palo Alto and Menlo Park having discussions on pollution control, and Palo Alto gets together some ideas and passes some laws, and then Menlo Park, let's say, starts down the road. Putting on your thinking cap, you're getting out your orb. If you were to look 20, 30 years down the line, could have any technology you wanted, what would the system look like in your mind that would let the Menlo Park people interact with the information that the Palo Alto people put together, add to it, improve it, and reach the best possible decision?
Well, I don't know if there's a technology that I can envision that will allow that. I think what we are seeing, though, is there's a gentleman named John Eager who's from San Diego State University. He's I believe his title is president of the World Organization of Smart Communities. And his group does talk about the rise of the region state, if you will, which is kind of an idea of having boundaries become less meaningful to government organizations from city to city in a large metropolitan area, and looking at what makes the most sense for the region. And there are a lot of groups that work in that way. There's a group called Joint Ventures Silicon Valley that's a public-private partnership for the Valley that has tried to help look at issues, transportation issues, economic development issues that affect the region rather than just the city of San Jose or the city of Santa Clara. So I think it's more of, instead of a technology, it's a human tool of collaboration that would evolve here, that would make the most sense and that would actually change things. The technology that we have available and that we will have available can usually be applied anywhere. It's how well do people work together and how well can they collectively use that technology that'll solve that type of problem in the future, I really think.
So you're saying more like how do they redefine boundaries to solve problems flexibly?
Yes.
Speaking of government software and copyrights, I understand that in the past there was a government exemption on copyrights, and there was a case where some law enforcement agency took some software that some company had written and, I guess, distributed it or actually sold it to other law enforcement agencies, possibly internationally and so on. That seems to me to be a barrier to having much commercial input on that sort of thing.
I remember the case you're talking about, but I'm not real familiar with it, so I can't comment on it. But on a related topic, and this may not be addressing the point you're raising, I do know that the federal government itself cannot copyright its own material. Some of the state governments can, but the federal government can't. That's just law. So any reports that are produced by the federal government are not copyrighted, and so anyone can copy them and publish them, which I think is a good thing, because after all, it's paid for by our tax dollars. One of the things that is happening, and this is happening at the federal and state levels both, is that sometimes government will contract out to a private organization to write up a report or do a study, and then it can be copyrighted. And so, as a result, some information that we might feel we should have a right to free, we have to pay for. I think a classic example of this, and this might generate some controversy in this room, I don't know, is the results of legal case. Yeah, West Publishing. You know, they publish all the legal decisions, and it's standard for lawyers to refer to legal decisions, to cases by the volume and page number in West. And my understanding is it's fairly costly to subscribe to get these volumes. And of course, it seems like an obvious thing to just dump all this stuff onto the net, right? Have the courts publish on the net, and I'm sure we can come up with a way to refer unambiguously to portions of cases. But this has been seriously fought, and in fact, a piece of legislation that has come up several times, it passed but didn't, it sort of passed but didn't become law, and it's going to come up again this year, most likely as a database bill, which is an effort that's being sponsored by West and other companies, similar companies, to essentially copyright information for the first time. Facts. That's never... Facts. It was also... another reason this came up is that there was a case which determined that the phone books phone book cannot be copyrighted because a phone book is a collection of information, but it's not creative. Remember, copyright is to encourage creativity rather than sweat of the brow. And so I think the case name is Feist, and the ruling was that you can't copyright the phone book, which is why, I don't know, in Palo Alto we get several phone books, more phone books than we want, because it's not copyrighted. And again, it's for the similar reasons that this whole database bill is being pushed. And as in the case of the copyright bill, there are two competing bills. And one of them takes a similar approach to the copyright bill, which is to basically make everything illegal except, which is what the copyright bill did. And the other tries to take more of an approach about, are you trying to infringe? Are you trying to use something? In other words, am I stealing all of your work, basically? And one of the concerns about the database bill is that there are major issues about fair use.
Barbara, I'm afraid our time, the film is running out, and we'll have to adjourn for 10 minutes or so and continue with the next session after that. So thank you very much, and just sit there quiet. Don't discuss things with each other.